Okay, so today we're going to be working on 1A, which means we are going to review fraction operations. Our content objective is students will be able to find the sum, difference, product, and quotient of fractions. Our language objectives, I'm going to be asking you to do two things. Number one, students will be able to explain verbally the essential steps of solving problems with fractions. Number two, I'm also expecting you to be able to read fraction answers correctly. And last but not least, why am I learning this? Well, it's important for solving equations. So go ahead and quickly write that down. So for our first example, it says here, adding and subtracting with uncommon denominators. I have 1/5 plus 2/5. Sorry, 1/2 plus 2/5. This one's not in your notes, so simply put your pencils down and enjoy the show. First things first is you want to find the lowest common denominator. In this case, it is 10. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put 10 as my denominator. Notice in yellow it says change the fractions so that they have a common denominator by multiplying it by a giant 1. What do I mean by a giant 1? Well, let's see. I went from a denominator of 2 to a denominator of 10. How did that happen? I have to multiply it by 5. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply it by 5 over 5. Why? Because what's 5 over 5? 1. So it's a giant 1, meaning multiplying anything by 1 doesn't change its actual value. So now my numerator is not going to be 1 anymore. It's actually going to be 5. Okay, I'm going to repeat that process on the other fraction for 2/5. I have a denominator of 5. I want to change it into a 10, so I have to multiply it by 2. But I need to keep it the same, so I have to multiply by 2 over 2. So that's my giant 1. So my new numerator is going to be 4. Now I'm just going to bring down the operation. And I'm going to get 9/10. You always have to ask yourself, is my fraction reduced? And the answer is yes. So I can move on. So now, hopefully, you were staying with me. I'm actually not going to have you do number 1. We're actually going to move to number 2. So go ahead and write the notes with me. So the first things first, I notice I have mixed numbers. I'm going to go ahead and turn those into improper fractions. So 6 1/5 becomes 31 over 5. 1 2/3 becomes minus 5/3. Now it's going to be my goal to then find the lowest common denominator so we can have like denominators. I think the lowest common denominator is 15, so I'm going to go ahead and set that up as 15. Notice I went ahead and brought the operation down as well. It's subtraction. Now I have to ask myself, how does a denominator 5 become a denominator 15? Well, I have to multiply by 3. But remember, keep in mind that giant 1 to keep things equivalent. I'm not just multiplying by 3, I'm multiplying by 3/3. Okay? Because 3/3 is just 1. Multiplying something by 1 doesn't change the value. So these fractions are equivalent. So 3 times 31 is 93. Thank you. Moving on to the next one, I have 5/3. Well, I have a denominator of 3, but it needs to be 15. So what do I need to do to that 3? I need to multiply it by 5. Right? So I'm not just multiplying by 5. I actually have to multiply by 5/5 because that is your giant 1. It's going to keep my fractions equivalent. So my new numerator is going to be 25. What I sometimes often see with students is they think, oh, I multiplied that left side by 3/3, so I'm going to multiply the right side by 3/3. Please be very careful. You're always trying to get the denominator to that number. So multiplying the 3 by another 3 is not going to give you 15. So you have to be very careful. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract. It's going to leave me with 68 over 15. I need to now convert this into a mixed number because right now it's an improper fraction. And I do that by dividing, and I'm going to be left with 4 8/15. 4 8/15. Okay. Questions so far? Okay, so now moving on to number 3. I'm just going to help set this up for you, and then I'm going to actually have you finish it off. So here I notice two things. The first thing is I have subtraction. And when I have subtraction, I have to add the opposite. So let's do that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and change that subtraction into an addition sign because I'm adding now. Now to take the opposite of negative 1/2. And the opposite of negative 1/2 will then become a positive 1/2. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and turn that mixed number into an improper fraction. And I do that by saying 7 times 4 is 28, plus 2 is 30, so I have 30 over 7 plus 1/2. Now go ahead and try that on your own. Okay, so for number 3, finishing this off, our lowest common denominator is 14. So the very first fraction needs to be multiplied by 2 halves. So my numerator is 60. The second fraction needs to be multiplied by 7 sevenths. And my new numerator is 7. I'm going to go ahead and bring down that operation, which is addition, leaving me with 67 over 14. When I divide to make this into a mixed number, I end up with 4 and 11/14. Okay? So moving on to number 4. Here, since it is subtraction, I'm going to add the opposite first. Second, I'm going to change it into an improper fraction. From there, go ahead and find a common denominator, which is 28. Notice I went ahead and kept the sign so it helps me not forget about the negatives. I'm put another 28 there. 7 needs to be multiplied by 4, so I'm going to multiply it by 4/4. Again, it's that big 1 because multiplying something by 1 doesn't change the value of it. So my new numerator is a negative 12, but again, since I already wrote the negative, I don't have to worry about it. For our second one, I have a denominator of 4, so I have to multiply that fraction by 7 sevenths. So my new numerator is going to be 63. Here is where you have to be very careful. That is a negative 12 and a positive 63. Are there more negatives or are there more positives? Positives. And how many more positives are there? 51 is the correct answer. Some of you accidentally added. Some of you said 12 plus 63 is 75. Okay, so you have to be very careful. It's those little details that's going to mess up your work, especially in the 8th grade where there's multiple steps. So you got to be very careful. So I'm going to divide that, and I'm going to be left with 1 and 23 over 28. Okay, perfect. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to actually skip number 5. We're going to head on to number 6. I'm going to show you one more, and then I'm going to have you do the next on your own. So we're skipping to number 6. Here, notice I already have an addition problem, and in fact, they made this super easy because I already have a mixed number. So here, can you guys help me out? What is the lowest common multiple? Everyone?
30.
Everyone?
30.
Very good. So here, I'm going to go ahead and set it up as 30. Again, I went ahead and included the sign so that I don't forget those negatives because they do make a difference. 5 needs to be multiplied by what to give me 30? Everyone? 6. So I'm going to multiply that by 6. 6 times 8 is going to give me a numerator of 48. Now on the right-hand side, I have a denominator of 6. I need to make it into a 30, so I'm going to have to multiply that by what, everyone? 5. So I'm not just multiplying by 5. I'm multiplying by 5/5. By 5/5. Okay, because it's that giant 1. Multiplying something by 1 doesn't change its value. It's still equivalent. So I have negative 55. However, since I already included the negative in the beginning, I'm just going to plug in that 55. Here, do I have more negatives or do I have more positives? Negatives. In fact, I have 7 more negatives. So I have negative 7 over 30. Can I reduce this fraction?
No.
Nope. I'm done. Okay. So now on that note, I'm going to go ahead and have you try number 7 and 8 on your own. So moving on to number 7, I'm going to go fairly quickly. I notice I have subtraction, so I'm going to go ahead and add the opposite. So now it's plus a negative 3/5. I'm going to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction. So now this is the new problem. I have to get a lowest common multiple for the denominator, which is going to be 15. So my new numerator, after multiplying it by 5/5, gives me negative 25. My second fraction, I have to multiply it by 3/3. And again, notice I'm not multiplying both sides by 5/5. right? I have to multiply by 3/3 because I need to make it a 15. So my new numerator is a -9. I'm going to go ahead and bring the actual operation down. Here, they're both negatives, right? So my answer is going to be negative. How many negatives do I have? I have a total of -34 over 15, which reduces to -2 and 4/15. Give me a show of hands. How many of you got that one correct? Okay, so hopefully for the rest of you, you're making those changes right now to make sure you have the correct work so that you can go off of it. Okay. So for number 8, here a lot of people were asking me, well, Miss saying, what am I supposed to do with the whole number? I put it over 1. I went ahead and changed that mixed number into an improper fraction as well. And here, it's funny because a lot of you guys were curious if what is my lowest common denominator going to be? 15. Because 1 could be made into any number you want, right? So it's going to be 15. So I'm going to multiply the first fraction by 15/15, so leaving me with 165. And my second fraction, I'm technically multiplying by 1 over 1. You don't have to, it's not necessary. But that's going to leave me with that -37, leaving me with 128 over 15, which leaves me with 8 and 8/15. How many of you got that one right? Great. For those of you who did not, can you please take another look and make those corrections so that you have something to go off of when you go home? Do this fairly quickly. Here, you could just multiply straight across. So for this example here, if I did, I would get 45 over 60. But then I would have to recognize what do both of these numbers have in common. Can I reduce it? Yes. In fact, I'm not sure if you know, but both of these numbers have a 15 in common. Okay, some of you may not have recognized that. Some of you may. But most of you guys won't be able to recognize it because we don't know multiples of 15 off the top of our head. So that's going to leave me with 3/4, or we can also say 3/4. But why not try cross-canceling? Cross-canceling is basically reducing before you multiply. So let me show you what that's going to look like. I'm going to look at the numbers across from each other to see if they have a factor in common that I can reduce out. So here, I'm noticing 5 and 10 both have a factor of 5 I can reduce. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Again, I'm going to look across. 6 and 9 have a factor of 3 in common. So 6 divided by 3 becomes 2, and 9 divided by 3 becomes 3. So now I'm going to go ahead and multiply straight across again, and it's going to leave me with an answer of 3/4, or again, you can say 3/4. Notice you're going to get the same answer, but this allows you to get rid of the reducing large numbers you may not recognize. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to have you do numbers 9, 10, and 11. Actually, go ahead and do all of them. I have faith in you. If you're not sure how to do this, please raise your hand. So for number 9, I noticed a 7 and 21 have a 7 in common. A lot of students like to say 3 because I think in their mind they're doing 21 divided by 7. That's why they always say 3. But I can't divide 7 by 3, can I? No, so I'm going to divide both of them by 7, leaving me with a 1 and a 3. So my answer is 5 over 24. Most of you got that one right. So for number 10, here I'm going to turn those numbers into improper fractions. So I have 9/4 times 10/3. 9 and 3 have a 3 in common, so it becomes 3 and 1. 4 and 10, a lot of students didn't notice that 4 and 10 are both even, so I can divide it by 2. So I'm going to that leaves me with 2 and 5. So my answer is going to be 15 over 2, but that leaves me with 7.5. Any questions? Number 11. Here, I would decide right now, if I have a negative times a positive, my answer is going to be negative. I would take care of that right away. Okay? But anyways, here I'm going to check if I can cross cancel. Notice I can't at all. That happens. So I'm multiply straight across. It's going to leave me with -5/6, and I'm done. Number 12. Here, decide right now, if I multiply a negative times a negative, is that going to be positive or negative?
Positive.
Positive. Perfect. I'm going to turn those into improper fractions. I'm going to check if I can cross cancel. 6 and 4 have a 2 in common, so I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2, leaving me with a 3 and a 2. 5 and 17 doesn't have anything in common, so multiplying straight across, I get 51 over 10, which leaves me with 5 and 1/10. Very last one. Number 13. What do I have to do to that negative 2? I have to put it over 1. Decide right now, is my answer negative or positive? Positive. Okay, I'm going to check to see if I can cross cancel. I can't. I'm going to be left with 8/3, which reduces to 2 and 2/3. Okay, are there any questions? Moving on now to dividing fractions. To divide by a fraction, what you need to remember to do is first, remember to flip over the second fraction. We call that the reciprocal. So I want you to get accustomed to using that vocabulary. And then you multiply. So here, let me give you an example. I have 4/5 divided by 2/3. Some of you often hear it as keep, change, flip. If that works for you, that's totally fine. So 4/5 stays the same. I'm changing it to multiplication. I took the reciprocal of 2/3, so that's how it became 3/2. I'm going to check if I can cross cancel. I can. They both have a 2 in common, so 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, leaving me with 6/5, but that's improper, so I got to change it to 1 1/5. Okay. So let's try the next example together. Okay. We have 7/9 divided by 2/3. I'm going to keep the 7/9. I'm going to change the division into multiplication. I'm going to take 2/3 and turn it into what, everyone? 3/2. So let's write that down. I'm going to check, does 7 and 2 have anything in common? Nope. Does 9 and 3 have anything in common?
Yeah.
They have a factor of 3 in common. So 9 divided by 3 is 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So I'm going to multiply straight across now and get 7/6, which will turn into 1 1/6. Okay. Moving on to number 15. This is a tricky one because it has different things that you want to pay attention to. First, I got to put 10 as a fraction, so I'm going to put 10/1 divided by, and I went ahead and turned that mixed number into an improper fraction. So I did 2 steps at the same time. Okay? I turned that 10 into a fraction by putting it over 1, and then I turned that mixed number into an improper fraction. Should be writing this down. So now I'm going to turn this division problem into multiplication by changing it to times the reciprocal, so it becomes 2/5. Now I'm just going to check if I can cross cancel. I notice the 10 and the 5 have a factor of 5 in common. So 10 divided by 5 is 2. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So 4/1 is just 4. Some of you are going to put 4/1. Please understand that's not totally simplified, so you want to take it a step further. Okay. On that note, go ahead and try the last ones on your own.